The Arizona wind moved like a restless spirit across the dry plains outside Red Mesa, lifting dust into the air and tugging at Clara Whitefeather's black shawl as she stood before her husband's grave. The land stretched wide and unforgiving around her, sun-bleached grass, distant mesas glowing red beneath the afternoon sky, and the small wooden house that now felt far too large for one person. Since Daniel's passing, the silence had grown heavy. So had the stairs. In town, conversations lowered when she entered the general store. Some looked at her with pity. Others with calculation. To them, she was not simply Clara. She was the Apache widow with valuable land and no man to defend it. She heard the horse before she saw it. Hooves thudded steadily against the dry earth, breaking the quiet. Clara turned slowly, already bracing herself. A tall rancher approached, broad-shouldered, dust clinging to his coat. She recognized him, Thomas Calloway, who owned the neighboring cattle spread. He stopped a respectful distance away and removed his hat. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said evenly. Clara's posture stiffened. "What do you want?" Thomas glanced toward the northern boundary fence. "Your north line's down. My cattle pushed through this morning. I came to mend it." She studied him carefully, searching his face for the familiar signs, hesitation before a request, politeness masking expectation. "And what do you expect in return?" The question lingered between them like heat rising from the ground. He seemed surprised. "Nothing. It's my herd that wandered." Clara folded her arms, chin lifting slightly. Men had come before with offers dressed as kindness. A banker promising to protect her interests. A trader offering to manage her livestock. Even the sheriff had suggested she might feel safer signing temporary authority over to someone more experienced. Every offer came with strings she could already feel tightening. Thomas walked toward the broken fence and began gathering tools from his saddlebag. He worked steadily, hammer striking wood with calm precision. No speeches. No bargains. Just labor. Clara watched from a distance, her heart wrestling with suspicion and something far more dangerous, hope. When he finished, he placed his hat back on his head and turned to leave. "Rancher," she called out, her voice sharper than she intended, "do you just want something from me like everyone else?" He paused, meeting her eyes without flinching. "No, ma'am. I just don't believe neighbors should stand alone." And for the first time in months, Clara felt her certainty waver. The storm rolled in without warning, a dark wall swallowing the horizon and turning the Arizona sky the color of ash. Clara had seen plenty of dust storms in her life, but this one carried a fury that made her chest tighten. The wind came first, hot and violent, ripping across the plains and tearing at anything not tied down. She rushed from the house toward the barn as boards began to groan and shutters slammed against the walls. Her horses whinnied nervously inside, sensing the pressure shift in the air. She grabbed a coil of rope and fought against the wind, sand stinging her face like tiny shards of glass. The barn roof shuddered, one corner already lifting. Clara climbed the side ladder despite the gusts trying to knock her back down. Since Daniel's death, she had done everything herself. There had been no one else to rely on. She refused to ask for help again, refused to owe anyone anything. A sudden crack split the air as a loose plank tore free. She lost her footing for a moment, heart slamming against her ribs. Through the haze of swirling dust, she heard something else, hoofbeats cutting through the storm. She squinted into the chaos and saw a familiar silhouette riding hard toward the ranch. Thomas Calloway. He dismounted quickly, tying his horse near the fence before running toward her. "Get down from there," he shouted over the roar of wind. "I've got it," she yelled back, though the words nearly vanished in the storm. Ignoring her protest, he climbed up beside her, bracing the beam with his shoulder while securing it with rope. Together they worked against the storm, hands raw, eyes burning, bodies pushed to the limit. There was no time for argument, no space for pride, only survival. After what felt like hours, the worst of the wind passed. They dropped down into the barn, breathing heavily, dust coating their clothes and skin. The animals had settled, though they remained restless. Clara leaned against a wooden post, brushing sand from her face. "You didn't have to come," she said, her voice quieter now. Thomas removed his hat, running a hand through his wind-tangled hair. "I saw the storm heading this way. Figured you might need another set of hands." She studied him carefully, searching again for the hidden price she'd grown used to expecting. Every man who offers help wants something eventually. His expression softened, not offended, but understanding. "My wife passed 3 winters ago," he said quietly. "After that, folks treated me like I couldn't manage alone. Some tried to buy parts of my land cheap. I know what grief looks like when others see it as opportunity." The confession hung in the still air between them. For the first time, Clara saw not a rancher with motives, but a man carrying his own loneliness. Outside, the sky began to clear. Inside, the storm between them had not disappeared, but it had begun to shift. The news arrived folded inside a stiff envelope bearing an official seal. Clara turned it over in her hands at the kitchen table, the paper heavier than it should have been. Outside, the morning sun spread pale light across her land, the same land her husband had worked, the same land his father had defended before him. She broke the seal and read slowly, her jaw tightening with every line. A railroad company intended to extend tracks through Red Mesa, and her ranch sat directly in its path. The letter spoke of progress and prosperity, of fair compensation and cooperation. It did not mention pressure, or force, or the quiet ruin of those who refused. By noon, whispers were already moving through town. The banker stopped by with an oily smile, suggesting she might avoid complications if she agreed early. The sheriff hinted that property disputes had a way of becoming tangled when paperwork wasn't perfectly in order. Clara listened without reacting, though anger burned steadily in her chest. They believed she would fold. They believed a widow stood alone. That evening, Thomas rode up her drive again, but this time his expression was grim. He held a similar letter in his hand. "They're buying up everything east of the ridge," he said. "Yours connects straight through." Clara crossed her arms, chin lifting defensively. "And you came to warn me? Or to suggest I sign it over before they make it harder?" His eyes flashed, not with offense but with resolve. "I came because they'll try to corner you first. They think you're easier to push." Silence stretched between them. She hated that part of her felt relief at his presence. "I won't sell," she said firmly. "This land is mine." "Then we make sure it stays that way," he replied. He explained what he'd learned, how the company sometimes manipulated tax records, how they pressured owners with threats of legal trouble. He offered to help her review her deeds, to ride the boundaries and document everything. Clara narrowed her eyes. "Why?" "Because I've seen what happens when folks stand alone against men with money and influence." Over the next few days, they worked side by side. They checked property markers under the hot sun, gathered old documents from storage, and visited neighboring ranchers who had also received letters. Thomas never spoke over her, never made decisions without her say. When railroad agents finally rode into town, expecting an easy negotiation, Clara was ready, with papers organized and witnesses prepared. Still, fear lingered beneath her steady exterior. One evening, watching the sunset bleed across the desert, she admitted quietly, "If I trust you and you betray me, I don't think I'll recover from that." Thomas met her gaze without hesitation. "Then don't trust me yet. Let me prove I'm worth it." For the first time since the letter arrived, Clara felt something stronger than fear rising within her, determination shared, not carried alone. Dawn broke with a hard, pale light that left no room for illusion. Clara had been awake long before the sun, documents spread across her kitchen table, each page carefully organized and tied with twine. Outside, the desert air felt tense, as if the land itself understood what was coming. Word had reached her the night before that the railroad representatives would ride out at first light, accompanied by the banker and the sheriff. They expected signatures. They expected surrender. When the riders appeared in the distance, Clara stepped out onto her porch, shoulders squared, chin high. Thomas stood near the fence line but not beside her, close enough to support, far enough to show this fight was hers. That mattered. The railroad agent dismounted with rehearsed politeness, offering a tight smile. He spoke of expansion, opportunity, the bright future that steel tracks would bring to Red Mesa. Then he laid the contract across a small wooden crate as if it were inevitable. "Sign today," he said smoothly, "and you'll receive generous compensation. Refuse, and legal complications may delay matters. We'd hate to see unnecessary trouble." Clara untied her stack of papers and calmly presented her deed, tax receipts, and documented boundary surveys. Her voice did not shake as she pointed out discrepancies in their proposed claim. One by one, neighboring ranchers, men Thomas had quietly spoken with, rode up and dismounted behind her. They carried their own copies, their own objections. The agent's confident expression faltered. "You misunderstand," the banker began, but Clara cut him off. "No," she said firmly. "You misunderstand. This land is not available." The confrontation stretched under the rising heat. Faced with organized resistance and solid documentation, the railroad agent finally gathered his papers with visible irritation. "This isn't over," he warned before mounting his horse. Clara watched them ride away, her pulse still pounding but her posture unbroken. When the dust settled, the ranchers dispersed with nods of respect. She turned to Thomas, who remained by the fence, hat in hand. "You could have benefited if they pushed me out," she said quietly. "Your grazing land would double." He gave a faint, almost weary smile. "Some things aren't meant to be taken. Especially not from someone who's already lost enough." Weeks passed. The fence between their properties was rebuilt stronger than before, not as a barrier but as a boundary respected. One evening, under a sky painted gold and crimson, Clara walked to where he stood repairing a post. "If you stay," she said carefully, "it won't be because I owe you." Thomas met her eyes, steady and certain. "I wouldn't have it any other way." And for the first time since Daniel's death, Clara allowed herself to believe that partnership did not have to mean possession, and that trust, when earned slowly, could feel like freedom instead of risk.